Okay, so you're ready for another deep dive. Great. This time we're really going deep, like way down. We're looking at a book that's not just any old book. I mean, it's a story, a powerful one, yeah? But it's also like a guide, for navigating those really tough parts of life. We're
Yeah.
talking Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, this book, it's incredible. A lot of people know it's about surviving the Holocaust, and it is, but it's also so much more than just that.
Right.
It
It's
lays out this revolutionary approach to therapy, which he calls logotherapy.
logotherapy.
Oh,
Okay, so our deep dive today, it's not just about, reading a classic and checking it off the list. It's about really getting to the heart of Frankl's message.
yeah.
What can we take away from this book and apply to our own lives, right?
Exactly. We want to see what makes this book so powerful, so timeless. Why does it still resonate with people today? And
Yeah.
well, I think a big part of it is how Frankl looks at resilience. Like, what is it that allows humans to keep going, to find purpose even when things are just awful? And the crazy thing is, he finds hope in this really dark place.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that Frankl, he actually wanted to publish the book anonymously.
Really?
Yeah, he was worried that if people knew it was his story, his personal experience, they might not take the ideas as seriously.
Huh. That's fascinating.
And this book, it became a global phenomenon. Like, despite his initial reservations, it shows you how universal the message is.
Absolutely. It speaks to something deep within all of us.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Mm.
Frankl, as a prisoner in these horrific concentration camps, he started observing his fellow inmates,
Yeah.
and he noticed this pattern, this kind of progression, a way they reacted psychologically to the whole experience.
Right. He saw these three distinct phases.
3 phases, yeah. So the first one hits them right after they arrive.
Yeah.
It's this overwhelming shock.
Yeah, the shock, it wasn't just, stepping off the train and into the camp. It often began even earlier, during the transport. As the reality of their situation, as it sunk in, they were already kind of bewildered.
Yeah, yeah. He talks about this delusion of reprieve, almost like they couldn't believe it was happening, even as they were witnessing these awful things.
Like what?
Well, like seeing these prisoners who seemed well fed,
Yeah.
relatively healthy. And it turned out they were the ones assigned to process the new arrivals at Auschwitz.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the new prisoners would cling to this hope that maybe, just maybe, things wouldn't be as bad as they feared. They'd see these prisoners who seemed okay and think, well, maybe we can make it too.
Right, right. Not knowing about the selections, the brutal process that was about to happen.
Exactly. And that's interesting, isn't it? Like, what does that tell us about how our minds work under extreme threat?
It shows how we cope, I think. These survival mechanisms kick in. It's like a buffer, so we don't get completely overwhelmed all at once.
So it's like when you hear bad news and you're just like in shock at first. You can't even process it.
Exactly. You might deny it or try to minimize it, and then later the full impact hits you.
But in the camps, that fragile hope, it was quickly shattered, right?
Oh, absolutely. The reality set in pretty fast.
Yeah. I mean, they were stripped of everything, belongings, clothes, their hair. It was just this brutal process, dehumanizing them, reducing them to nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And even in that chaos, Frankl mentions these surreal moments, like an experienced prisoner offering these reassurances that turned out to be completely false.
Oh, right, right. And then comes the horror of the selections,
Yeah.
this instant judgment of who would live, who would die. It's heartbreaking. That story of the block doctor begging for his son's life, pleading with Dr. M,
Yeah.
and being so coldly refused.
It just shows how powerless they were.
Completely powerless. And the final blow of this first phase, as Frankl describes it, is this striking out of their former lives.
So they're stripped physically, and then their past is just gone.
Gone.
Yeah.
He uses this powerful image of a guard dismissing his manuscript, his life's work, with just a single vulgar word.
Wow.
It's like their identity, their whole past, it's all erased.
It makes you think about how important our sense of self is. What happens when that's attacked, challenged so deeply?
Yeah, what are we left with? But Frankl, being a psychiatrist, he points out that these reactions, the shock, the denial,
Hmm.
they're not signs of weakness.
Right.
In that kind of situation, they were normal.
Normal reactions to an abnormal situation.
Exactly. And then this initial shock gives way to the second phase, which is apathy.
Apathy. This kind of emotional numbness. It's like a defense mechanism,
Yeah.
They couldn't survive psychologically without it.
Right, right. And it's a gradual thing, right? Like, at first, the prisoners couldn't even bear to watch the punishment parades. The guards would beat other prisoners and they couldn't even look.
Right.
But then over time, that sensitivity,
Yeah.
it just eroded. They became detached from these daily horrors.
He gives some really disturbing examples, like,
Oh, yeah. Like the prisoner who was sick, feverish, and he went to the sick bay, but it was the wrong time, and he was savagely punished for it.
it's unbelievable.
And then that story about the man carrying a corpse, and
Hmm.
Frankl's just eating his soup right across the hut.
While the head of the corpse is bumping up the stairs.
Yeah, with this uncanny rattling noise, he says. And he had just spoken to that man a few hours before.
That's just, I can't even
The
imagine.
level of emotional numbing,
Yeah.
it's hard to grasp. What does that say about us, about empathy? Like, what happens to it when you're constantly surrounded by suffering?
It shows the limits, I think. The human mind can only take so much.
And, you don't have to be in a concentration camp to experience that, right? Like, maybe you've been in a situation, a tough one, where you had to distance yourself emotionally just to cope.
Yeah, I think we've all had those moments. Maybe not to that extent, but
Right, right. So this emotional blunting, it also led to what Frankl calls cultural hibernation.
what does he mean by that?
Well, within the camp, people sort of withdrew into themselves. There wasn't much discussion about things like art or literature.
Like they just shut down?
Yeah, in a way. But there were two exceptions. Politics.
So they were still interested in the outside world.
Well, sort of. There were all these rumors flying around about the war, about what was happening outside. But these rumors, they were often contradictory, and they just made people more anxious.
So not exactly helpful.
No, not really. And the other exception was religion. Some prisoners found comfort in their faith.
That makes sense. It can give you a sense of hope, something to hold on to.
Right. But Frankl also makes this interesting observation about optimists.
Optimism.
Yeah. He says that in this environment, these diehard optimists, they actually irritated their fellow prisoners.
Why? Why would that be?
Well, I think maybe it felt out of touch. Like their forced cheerfulness didn't acknowledge the reality of the situation.
Right, and maybe even a little disrespectful, like they weren't taking the suffering seriously.
It's like, hope is important, but it has to be grounded,
Yeah.
especially in these situations.
Absolutely. But even in this bleakness, Frankl noticed how powerful inner life could be, like the memories of loved ones. They became a lifeline for some prisoners.
Yeah, yeah. Frankl himself, he would vividly remember his wife,
Mm.
her smile, her presence, and it gave him strength.
It's amazing what the mind can do.
And he realized that love, that deep connection, that's the ultimate meaning. It's something that even death can't touch. Like that beautiful quote he uses, "Set me like a seal upon my heart. Love is as strong as death." It's powerful, right?
It really is. It shows how important those connections are, even when you're physically isolated.
Right. And it's not just about memories. Sometimes, even in this horrible place, there would be these little glimpses of beauty, of nature.
Like what?
Frankl talks about a sunset he saw. It was so stunning, it made him think how beautiful the world could be. And the light in a distant farmhouse, just a tiny pinprick of light in a darkness. He says, "Esux in tenebris lucet," which means the light shines in the darkness.
Wow.
And even something as simple as a bird landing nearby, it could be this moment of connection to something outside the camp.
So these little moments, they offered a kind of escape.
Yeah, yeah. A reminder that there was still beauty, still life beyond the barbed wire. For you, the listener, think about those little moments in your own life, the things that bring you joy, even when things are tough. They can make a huge difference.
For sure.
And then there was the camp cabaret.
But what?
Yeah, cabaret was this makeshift form of entertainment. Prisoners would put on shows, sing songs, tell jokes.
In a concentration camp.
I know, it's hard to believe. But it was their way of escaping, of forgetting, even if just for a little while.
But wasn't food really scarce when they need all their energy?
Oh, yeah. Frankl says that participating in the cabaret, it often meant sacrificing some of their precious food rations.
Wow. So they were willing to give up food for a chance to laugh, to be entertained.
Yeah, it shows how much they needed that escape, that connection to something
Yeah.
human. Frankl tells this story about trying to cheer up his friend, a surgeon, by making these dark jokes about camp life.
What kind of jokes?
He compared the constant shouting in the operating room to the chaos of the camp. He'd say, "Action, action," like they were on a movie set.
I mean, it's funny in a dark way, I guess.
Yeah, it's that gallows humor, It's how they coped.
It's incredible how resilient the human spirit can be.
It really is. And then there were these little moments of relief, these unexpected things that gave them hope.
Like what?
Well, like arriving at a camp and realizing there was no chimney, no crematorium. Yeah. Or encountering someone who showed a bit of kindness,
Mm.
like the cook who actually distributed the soup equally instead of keeping the best for himself.
So these small acts of decency, they really stood out.
Absolutely. But, it makes you think about those who didn't. Those who, in these desperate circumstances, put their own survival above everything else. It's hard to judge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a tough question. How can we possibly know what we would do in that situation?
Right. But the constant threat of death, the struggle to survive,
Yeah.
it really wore them down. It stripped away the value of everything except staying alive.
It reduced them to their most basic instincts.
Exactly. And Frankl, he talks about this longing for solitude. He found these brief moments of peace by the water pipe where he could just dream of home.
And that same spot, it ended up saving 3 lives later on.
It did, yeah. It's incredible. And there's that story about him being offered a chance to be removed from a transport, but he chose to stay with his friends.
Even though it meant risking his life?
Yeah. He felt this sense of shared fate, like they were in it together. It reminds me of that story, Death in Tehran.
Oh, right. About how you can't run from your destiny.
Exactly. And then, out of nowhere, this Red Cross delegate arrives. It's almost miraculous.
It was like a sudden change in the whole
Oh,
atmosphere.
completely. They were given medicine, even cigarettes, and for the first time in so long, the immediate fear of death, it receded.
And this is leading up to the third phase, right?
Yeah.
Liberation.
Yeah. But even then, even with liberation, it wasn't a simple happy ending.
He talks about the psychological bends, right?
Exactly. It's this idea that the sudden release of pressure, it can actually be harmful, like a diver coming up too quickly from the depth.
Oh, I see.
And there was this disillusionment, this realization that suffering, it didn't just end with the camps.
So even though they longed for freedom, they weren't prepared for what came after.
Yeah, it's a common misconception, People think liberation meant instant happiness. But Frankl says many were completely unprepared for the emptiness, the unhappiness that they found in the outside world.
It's like they had survived the camps, but they still had to grapple with the trauma, the loss.
Exactly. And this brings us to the core of Frankl's work, his approach to therapy, logotherapy.
And this key concept, the will to meaning.
Yeah, so logotherapy, Frankl called it the third Viennese school of psychotherapy.
So after Freud and Adler.
Right. And what sets it apart is this focus on the will to meaning as the primary driving force in human beings.
Okay, so not pleasure, like Freud said, or power, like Adler.
Exactly. Frankl is saying that what really motivates us deep down is the need to find meaning, to have a purpose. What do you? Does that resonate with you?
I think, yeah. I mean, we've all had those moments where we ask ourselves, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling good or being successful. It's about something more.
Right. And when that will to meaning is frustrated, blocked, Frankl says it leads to existential frustration. He even coined this term neurogenic neuroses to describe the mental distress that comes from this lack of meaning.
Neurogenic neuroses.
Yeah, it comes from the Greek word nous, which means mind or spirit. So it's this idea that our mental health isn't just about our psychology, but also about this spiritual dimension, this need for meaning.
So it's not just about your past experiences or your emotions. It's about having a reason to be here.
Exactly. And the goal of logotherapy is to help people find that meaning, to uncover what he calls the hidden logos of their existence.
Almost like therapy for the soul.
In a way, yeah. And he talks about this concept of neurodynamics.
Dynamics.
Yeah, it's this healthy tension between what we've already achieved and what we still want to do, what we feel we should be doing. This striving towards a goal that's worthwhile.
It's like you need that challenge, that sense of purpose to really thrive.
Right. It reminds me of that Nietzsche quote, "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow." Frankl saw this in the camps. The prisoners who had something to live for, a task, a loved one waiting, they were much more likely to survive.
It's amazing how powerful purpose can be.
It really is. And then on the other side, there's the existential vacuum.
The what?
The existential vacuum, it's this feeling of emptiness, boredom, a lack of direction, like you don't know what you want, why you're here.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Oh, yeah. Frankl believed it was a widespread phenomena, especially in modern society. He said it comes from this loss of traditional values, of instincts, Like, we don't have those clear guides for behavior anymore.
So it's like we have all this freedom, but we don't know what to do with it.
Exactly. And he even did these surveys with students, and a lot of them reported feeling this existential vacuum.
Wow. So this is not just a small group of people. This is a big issue.
Yeah. And Frankl noticed that this existential vacuum, it can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it's masked by a drive for power, for money, for success.
Well, like they're trying to fill the void with things.
Right. Or can show up as a desperate search for pleasure, what he called sexual compensation.
It's like they're trying to distract themselves from this deeper emptiness.
Exactly. And that's why, he argues, it's so important to address this need for meaning directly, rather than just focusing on these surface-level desires.
So how do we do that? How do we actually find meaning in life?
Well, Frankl says that the meaning of life, it's not this big universal answer. It's personal.
Personal. So there's no one right answer.
Right. The meaning of life, it's different for everyone, and it changes from moment to moment.
Yeah.
What matters is the specific meaning of your life right now. He uses this analogy of the chess champion.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Like, if you ask a chess champion, what's the best move?
Mm.
There's no answer.
Because it depends on the game, the situation.
Exactly. And it's the same with life. The meaning of your life, it depends on your circumstances, the challenges you're facing, the questions that life is asking you.
So it's not about us asking, what's the meaning of life, but about life asking us questions.
Yes. And we answer those questions through our actions, our choices, the responsibilities we take on. In logotherapy, responsibility is like the key thing.
It puts the focus on us, doesn't it? Like we're not just waiting for meaning to be handed to us, we're creating it.
Exactly. And this leads to another important concept, self-transcendence.
Self-transcendent.
Yeah, it's the idea that we find meaning not by looking inwards at ourselves, but by directing our attention outwards towards something bigger than ourselves.
So like a cause you believe in or another person.
Yes. Frankl says that when we focus on something beyond ourselves, that's when we truly find fulfillment. He even says that self-actualization, this idea of becoming the best version of yourself,
Yeah.
it's not a goal you pursue directly. It's more like a side effect.
A side effect of what?
Of self-transcendence, of focusing on something beyond yourself. Like, have you ever noticed that when you're really engaged in helping someone or working on a project you're passionate about, you kind of forget about your own worries?
Yeah, actually, that makes sense. You're so focused on the task on the other person.
Exactly. And Frankl outlines 3 main ways we can find meaning in life.
3 ways.
Yeah. The first one is creating something. A work of art, a business, a family, anything that contributes to the world.
So like leaving your mark.
Exactly. The second way is through experiencing something or encountering someone.
So this is about being open to new experiences.
Yeah, but it's more than just passively enjoying things. It's about actively engaging with goodness, with truth, with beauty, with nature, with culture,
Yeah.
and especially with love.
Love.
Yeah, Frankl believed that love is the only way to truly understand another person, to see their potential, and to help them reach it. He even says that love is as basic as sex, and that sex, at its best, is an expression of love.
It's a pretty profound way of looking at it.
It is. And the third way to find meaning, and this is really powerful, especially considering his experiences, is through the attitude we take towards suffering.
So even when things are bad, when we're hurting, we can still find meaning.
Exactly. Even if we can't change the situation, we can choose how we respond to it. We can find meaning in how we endure it, in our courage, our dignity. That's really powerful, isn't it?
It is.
And Frankl, he gives these amazing examples from his own experience, like finding the Shema Yisrael prayer in the pocket of a dead inmate's coat and seeing it as this challenge to live his beliefs.
Wow.
And he asks his fellow prisoners this profound question. Could an ape being used for polio research ever understand the meaning of its suffering?
It's a good question. I mean, we assume animals don't have that capacity.
Right. And then he takes a step further and says, well, maybe there's a dimension of meaning that's beyond our current understanding. Maybe someday we'll see the bigger picture and understand the purpose of our own suffering.
It's definitely something to think about.
He also talks about the role of faith, of religious belief in therapy. He tells this moving story about a rabbi who lost his whole family. He was completely devastated.
So how did Frankl help him?
Well, he didn't try to convert him or anything. He worked within the rabbi's own faith, suggesting that his suffering might have a purpose, that it might purify him and prepare him to be reunited with his family in the afterlife.
It's about meeting people where they are, isn't it?
Exactly. And Frankl, he also has this interesting way of looking at the past. He says we shouldn't just see it as a bunch of lost opportunities, as this stubble field of transitoriness. He says we should see it as a full granary where all our deeds, our joys, our sufferings, they're all stored and they can't be taken away.
So instead of dwelling on what's gone, we should appreciate what we've lived.
Exactly. And that's what logotherapy is about. It's not about some naive optimism. It's about actively searching for and embracing the meaning in all aspects of our lives. And he developed some really interesting techniques to help people do that.
Like paradoxical intention and dereflection.
Yes. They sound kind of strange,
Right.
A little bit. So paradoxical intention, it's this idea of using a paradoxical wish to overcome anxiety.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. Frankl tells this story about a guy with a really bad stutter. And one day, he decided to, intentionally try to stutter to get sympathy from the audience.
That was playing it up.
Yeah, and he couldn't stutter. It's like, by trying to do it, he actually overcame it.
That's fascinating.
And it's the same principle with insomnia. The more you try to force yourself to sleep, the harder it gets. So the logotherapeutic advice is to actually try to stay awake.
Really?
Yeah. And often that helps people fall asleep.
Yeah.
It's like by letting go of the struggle, you actually achieve what you want.
It's like that thing where, you try not to think about something and then you can't stop thinking about it.
Exactly. And Frankl says this technique can be really effective for things like OCD and phobias. And the interesting thing is, he says even short-term therapy can have lasting results.
So it's not always about years and years of analysis.
Not necessarily. Sometimes a little bit of the right kind of therapy can make a big difference. And then there's dereflection. This one is about shifting your attention away from yourself, your problems, and towards something else.
Towards what?
Another person, a task, anything that's meaningful. He tells this story about a woman who had problems with frigidity. She was so focused on trying to have an orgasm that she actually couldn't.
It's like she was overthinking it.
Exactly. And by shifting her focus to her partner, to the act of love itself, she was able to experience pleasure again. It shows how this hyper-intention, this over-focus on achieving something, can actually get in the way.
It's like stage fright. The more you worry about messing up, the more likely you are to mess up.
Exactly.
Right.
So getting out of your own head, it can be really helpful. Frankl also talks about these broader societal implications of his work. He has this idea of a psychiatric credo and this concept of tragic optimism.
Tragic optimism? What does that even mean?
Well, Frankl believed that every era has its own kind of collective neurosis, and he thought that in the 20th century, it was the existential vacuum, this feeling of meaninglessness. And he was really concerned about the influence of nihilistic philosophies on psychotherapy.
So he thought therapy should be more hopeful.
Yes. He believed that even in the most horrific circumstances, people have the freedom to choose their attitude, to take a stand. And his own experience in the camps, it proved that. He was saying, look, humans aren't just robots. We have choice, even in the darkest of times.
That's really empowering.
It is. And he also believed that freedom and responsibility, they go hand in hand. He even suggested building a statue of responsibility next to the Statue of Liberty, to emphasize that true freedom comes with the understanding that we have obligations to each other, to the world.
And his psychiatric credo.
Ah, yes. This is a really important part of his philosophy. He believed that even in cases of severe mental illness, even psychosis, there's still a core of the person that remains free.
So even someone who's really struggling mentally, they still have dignity.
Yes. He said that the innermost essence of a human being is untouchable. And without that belief, he wouldn't have been able to do his work as a psychiatrist.
It's a really humane perspective.
It is. And it reflects this shift towards a more humanized approach to psychiatry. It's not just about treating symptoms, it's about seeing the whole person.
The human behind the diagnosis.
Exactly. Frankl believed that we are self-determining within the limits of our biology and environment. We can choose good or evil. And our potential, it's not just determined by our circumstances, but by the choices we make. He said that his generation, they had seen the best and worst of humanity, the horrors of Auschwitz, and the incredible acts of kindness. And that leads us to tragic optimism.
Okay, so tragic optimism. This is about finding hope even in the face of tragedy.
Yes. Frankl called it saying yes to life in spite of everything. It's not about denying the bad things, the pain, the guilt, the inevitability of death. It's about finding a way to be optimistic despite those things.
So it's not naive, it's more like a deeper kind of resilience.
Exactly. And he says there are three main ways to cultivate tragic optimism. First, by turning suffering into something positive, something creative.
So like channeling your grief into art or music,
Yes. Or, starting a foundation in memory of someone you've lost. Second, by using guilt as an opportunity to change, to grow.
learning from your mistakes.
Right. And third, by seeing the limited time we have as an incentive to take action, to make the most of every moment.
It's about finding meaning in the face of our own mortality.
Exactly. But Frankl also reminds us that these things like optimism, hope, faith, love, you can't just force them. They have to come from a genuine place.
They have to be earned in a way.
Yes. And he also connects meaninglessness to mental health issues like depression and suicide.
Oh, right. He saw that connection in the camps.
He did. And while not every case of depression is caused by a lack of meaning, he believed that having a strong sense of purpose can be a huge protective factor. He would talk to prisoners who were suicidal, and he would emphasize their responsibility to keep going, to find meaning, even in that situation.
It's like giving them a reason to live.
Exactly. And he's also noticed that having a shared purpose, a common goal, it could help people overcome conflict.
He mentions that experiment with the Boy Scouts, right?
Yeah, they divided them into groups, and they started fighting with each other.
Classic Lord of the Flies scenario.
Right. But then they gave them a task that required them to cooperate, and all that hostility, it just disappeared.
It's amazing how a shared goal can bring people together.
And Frankl emphasizes that even victims of horrible situations, they still have the power to choose their attitude, to find meaning in their suffering. He quotes Edith Weisskopf-Joelson, who said, "Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning."
That's powerful.
And he gives these incredible examples, like Jerry Long, who was a quadriplegic.
What about him?
Well, he didn't see himself as a victim. He found meaning in his life, in helping others, in his own growth. He said that his suffering, it actually gave him a new perspective, a new appreciation for life.
It's inspiring, you know? It shows that even in the darkest of times, there's still hope.
Absolutely. And Frankl also talks about guilt, about how it's important to take responsibility for our mistakes, but also to move beyond them, to grow. He shares a story about a convict who was always being labeled, as a criminal, and he never had a chance to explain himself, to tell his side of the story.
So he felt like he was being reduced to his past.
Yes, and Frankl emphasizes the importance of redemption, of giving people a chance to change. And he also talks about collective guilt, this idea that an entire group can be blamed for the actions of a few. He rejects that idea, using the analogy of a knife. A knife, it can be used for good or evil. It's not the knife itself that's to blame, it's the person who's using it.
Right, and he was very vocal about rejecting collective guilt, especially in the context of the Holocaust.
Absolutely. He believed that each individual is responsible for their own choices.